It was about this time last year that I was at a meeting. A lot of young people were there. And one teenage boy, whom I knew for a long time, really, since he was in kindergarten, in the midst of that meeting said he lived with a real fear of death, a real fear of hell. Of course, I responded to that, told him, you really didn't have to. And as time has passed, I'm really quite sure he's understood more and doesn't carry that fear. In fact, none of us really have to carry that fear if we're in the right place. Some of you may have heard the podcast or seen on the web a rendition of the spiritual My Lord, What a Morning, which was sung chorally last summer. And I thought about that spiritual at this time because when we're in the Easter season and when we're in this season of illness and danger, we have a heightened awareness of death and its presence and our fragileness and our vulnerabilities. And this spiritual really speaks to that. And in case you don't remember the text, it is, My Lord, what a morning when the stars begin to fall. You'll hear the trumpet sound to wake the nations underground, looking to my Lord's right hand when the stars begin to fall. The stars falling is a symbol of the end of the world. And of course, we know the famous text, the trumpet shall sound and the dead shall be raised. In that instance, it's really talking about our resurrection and our coming to God's presence after our death. And the spiritual writer had hope, knowing that he could be at God's right hand. So how can we have the hope, the kind of hope that was expressed to this young person? And that is we recognize, as he did, our sin and our unworthiness to be in God's presence. We simply have a conscience that tells us that, and the Spirit witnesses to that, and the Scriptures witness to that. So how has God solved the problem of our separation from him? Well, since we all inherited the propensity and the inevitability of sin in the Adam's race, he sent a new Adam, his son, Christ, who was born not of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. A new start, a new kind of person who was able to live as we were to have lived. And in that regard, set an example. And in that regard, incurred no separation from God and no guilt from God. But at a time chosen before the world was even made, he allowed himself to be taken and betrayed and crucified and died. We celebrated all of that. But we also celebrated that that was not the last word, that God had even more to offer, and that he, on the third day, rose from the dead, and that God showed his power not just to forgive our sins by the substitution of Christ in our stead, but that he could overcome and did overcome the consequence of sin, which is death. So, with the writer of the spiritual, we can look forward to sitting at God's right hand. We're told, and we're promised in the first epistle of John, that if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive our sins. We're also told in the Gospel of John that whoever receives him receives the power to become children of God. Many of us listening have certainly done that and have that assurance. And if somehow or another that hasn't happened to you, maybe at this moment the Lord is knocking on the door of your heart and saying, let me in. And when the trumpet sounds, you will be at my right hand. So let's celebrate these truths by hearing the spiritual, My Lord, What a Morning.